Right, hi everyone. My name is Tom Kitchen. I am a PhD student at the University of Lincoln, currently studying a PhD in culture and heritage management. My particular focus is on place and placemaking, but more specifically contested placemaking, which is a new concept and development, which is quite exciting. I'm also an associate lecturer here in Lincoln International Business School, but particularly within the Department of Marketing, Tourism and Language. And I also teach on a module called Critical Inquiry Skills for the work-based distance learning programs, which is great. Now, my presentation, my research it's related to my PhD, but slightly off kilter. And this was influenced by a recent PhD kind of workshop that I just did, which was to look at how culture and heritage have been engaged with during lockdown. And it was interesting because I was already thinking about this before lockdown happened, or as in kind of during the first couple of weeks of lockdown, and just prior to that. So the title is called "Wow, I Never Knew This Was Here," and strengthen relationships with our local heritage during lockdown. And generally stemmed from initially some frustrations with people taking pictures of things in their localities that they had been immersed in, but it had taken a global pandemic for them to actually significantly recognize them and appreciate them, and it frustrated me slightly. But it turned into some really interesting perspectives and thoughts, which I will go into now. As I mentioned, the research topics stem from the increased content on social media platforms related to culture, but also the built and natural heritage during lockdown. I made the decision based on this, and as I again mentioned earlier, also influenced by a conference stroke workshop, to investigate whether geographical and time restrictions had catalyzed a new appreciation for both the outdoors and the places that we call home. I was also, as I kind of thought more on this topic, I found other areas quite fascinating. So I wanted to know whether getting out had aided in suppressing the anxieties and other mental health issues that could have been further amplified if we were to have gone into a complete strict lockdown. And then I was curious to understand whether this noticeable increased engagement through social media would be continued post-lockdown and post-COVID. So this is the context which I then decided to kind of investigate. Before I go on that, I want to provide some backstory. So we know, everyone, this is a very kind of regurgitated, well, I guess saying, but COVID-19 and the resulting grounding to place has transferred perspectives from global to local, especially during peak times. I mean, that's all we had was our engagement with our local areas, if we were lucky enough to get out. Fundamentally, business and leisure activities have become largely space and place dictated. Even now, as things start to open up, there is still a mass restriction on where we can go and what we can do, both in a leisure capacity and also a business capacity. So yeah, this kind of this notion of being time, space, and place dictated is very important at the moment, and how we act and how we endeavour to trade, to engage when the things are so unique to a certain area, which is fascinating. Moreover, limitations placed on our movement has placed immeasurable burdens on the mental well-being of the global society. But the interesting thing, and this is why I've kind of titled this A Curious Thing, is whilst anxieties have been significantly amplified by the current crisis, certain situational revelations have manifested that have helped counteract these mental repercussions. So during peak lockdown, the UK public, in order to exit the house, have had to adapt to a fluid and changing context. I mean, even now, we don't know what's going to happen in 2 or 3 weeks' time. Is there going to be a second peak? But we've had to adapt. We've had to change our lifestyles. Our habits, our day-to-day cycles. It's completely changed the context of kind of living, societal living. So controlled by limitations, we've had no other choice but to explore. And arguably, this is more so than ever our own backyards, which we have then taken the role of tourists in our own communities. We've not had the influx because of limitations in travel, so we've had to explore our own areas, which is interesting. And I will go on to some interesting statistics shortly. So as a result of being tourists in our own communities, every footpath, every cycle track, and every bridleway nearby where we live has been trodden now, as we have optimized. In certain circumstances, we've also exploited our engagement with a more restricted outdoors. But what is the significance of this? So over time, urban living, the lures of technology and or social mundanity has, for many, shrouded the encounter with nature. For all intents and purposes, we have been blinded by banality. This lack of nature engagement and the impression that it has had on well-being is not just a curious indicator. It's not isolated, it's not single. It actually forms part of a wider body of impactful impressions, including the deterioration of public health, reduced emotional affinity, and a cycle of disaffection towards nature. And this is, just going back, one of the situational issues with normality is that we've forgot about, we've put aside our engagement with nature because life has just taken over too much. With COVID-19, the ensuing global closure and also the grounding to place, a really interesting resonance has formed, which has reaffirmed and also solidified what mundanity, what our daily lives had actually helped us forget. And that is connecting with nature does promote enhanced cognitive well-being, which leads to the return of mental prosperity. So actually what's happened with COVID, our re-engagement with nature is very positive. And in fact, this perspective has been gaining ground as a growing body of academic and also co-curricular research, which is regularly communicated the benefits that nature engagement can have on our happiness, well-being, and mental health. And also, this movement is not just research-led. Through social media, which is where I picked it up, we've also co-created and communicated the importance of our personal experiences with the outside. Just quickly going back to my second point in terms of the academic and co-curricular research. The University of Derby, the University of Cambridge, Manchester, for example, are all looking into to this. But there's also interesting points to be made in terms of journalism. In terms of TV, for example, Springwatch are a huge ambassador for the importance of getting out, if we can, during this kind of time. And Chris Packham regularly talks about the importance of nature on our mental health and well-being. So really interesting that it's not just an academic context, but it's also co-curricular, but also led by us in a co-creation capacity. The foundation of this research derived from musings following the observation of an increase in cultural and natural heritage-based imagery and related posts throughout social media during peak lockdown. What accelerated this rise in nature-based posting? Now we can, yes, say that limitations in lifestyle, restricting subject options is a plausible consideration, but it's also plausible to consider this being a much deeper monetary issue, but having deeper meaning. So we know that there exists an abundance of literature within academia, throughout kind of the published media, confirming the adverse cognitive effects of social media. But we actually forget that social media can have beneficial attributes. So, for instance, considering the social divisions enforced by lockdown, many have relied on social media to maintain their social connections through the sharing of thoughts and feelings. And moreover, sharing has given further insights into our personalities, which has presented others with a better sense of who we are, also what we care about, and then also what we have absorbed through our experiences through and during lockdown, which is fascinating. I think the fragility of the situation has actually allowed for us to understand who we are and much better. And I mean, there's probably one of the outcomes of that is the significance and the issues that we're facing at the moment. People really have come out of their shell because they haven't had mundanity to essentially restrict and suppress some of the thoughts. And yeah, it's kind of in a way it's been a good thing, but also in a way it's been an incredibly negative thing as well. But that's a different subject. Additionally, given that the subject focus has been nature and us in it, one may argue that our physical engagement with and also digital communication has acted as a twofold function. So it's intensified our reconnection with the outside world, whilst further suppressing the anxieties amplified by the crisis. There is also another potential outcome of this crisis, and one that really needs to be acted upon by councils and DMOs immediately, so destination marketing or management organisations, which is whether our backyard tourism, alongside the digital representation of our outdoor experiences, has aided in the reinforcement and connection to our localities, our place. The culture and heritage in a tangible, intangible, physical or natural context is very strongly linked with leisure activities of the learned and practical variety, often influencing the integration of education and leisure. Furthermore, cultural heritage is often overtly linked with cultural distinctiveness, identity and nationalism, not always a good thing, or exists as an articulation of ancestral links with important places, traditions, and narratives. Fundamentally, engagement with our cultural heritage constructs experiential diversity that can lead towards mental advantages, including reinforced assimilation, cognitive perception, and retroactive association. And it is through the absorption on and understanding of our engagement, the association with personal memories through experiencing, and the meaning making taken from our encounters that substantiates the importance of cultural heritage as reinforcing our position with place. And this absorption and understanding of our engagement, the association through experiencing, and also the meaning making, has been amplified by our engagement during this lockdown, or our engagement with the natural heritage and cultural heritage during the COVID-19 lockdown. So it's immensely important in terms of reinforcing our position within place. When we consider these place distinctions as a collective concept, it is plausible to assign the term image congruity. So this term refers to the fit between the meanings and values associated with a physical place and a person's image of self. So the way in which a person sees themselves within a place, i.e. subject relevancy, is very much influenced by a set of symbolic systems, including social structures and then environmental cues, i.e. built, cultural, and natural. And arguably through the wider acknowledgement of our surroundings as a result of the pandemic, symbolic systems and cues may have been consolidated, leading to a stronger and more robust place affiliation. So our immersion into the natural environments, our immediate environments within lockdown, may have actually reinforced our attachment to where we live, which for me, as someone that discusses place, is very engaged with community, the notion of civic pride, which can be amplified through a re-engagement or a new engagement with a local area, essentially learning and understanding, has a significant impact on the desirability of a destination. It's huge. It does more for tourism than a marketing strategy, for example. People who believe and love the place that they come from are those places that are generally desirable. Manchester, Sheffield, for example, Leeds. People who live in those areas know everything about their areas because they're invested in it. And that investment, that civic pride, is significantly important. And this is what lockdowns enabled us to do. We have been able to immerse ourselves and experience things that we never knew was there. And this is essentially how it stems back to the title. But we can only find out by asking. And I did decide to ask. I went ahead and I did, just because I was really interested and I was finding some good literature, but also increasingly interested in whether my questions were valid. So I did a pilot study. So I designed a very simple pilot questionnaire. The questionnaire was split into 4 sections. The first was connecting with place. The second was documenting your discovery. The third was heritage and well-being. And then the fourth was demographic information. There was 20 main questions in the questionnaire and then 10 demographic questions. And I made sure, just because this is a pilot and also I didn't want to take up people's time, most of those questions were closed. So yes, no, multiple choice. 5 individuals acted to pre-test the questionnaire and they scrutinized before it went live. In terms of the way that the questionnaire was distributed, I used a mixture of convenient sampling because I placed it on Facebook, and also snowball sampling because I encouraged my friends to share. Obviously, this is a limitation, but this was a pilot study just to see if my questions and my thoughts were on the right track and whether this was worthy of pursuing any further. My target for the pilot was 50, which is quite high, but I did actually get 62 responses in total, which is great. And the completion rate for the questionnaire was between 5 and 10 minutes. 10 minutes being someone that just takes their time to get through, but generally between 5 and 10 minutes. In terms of the participants, so the median participant age was 36, but from 18 to 65, it was quite an equal split. 56.5% were female, 40.3% were male, which I was quite happy about. 88.7% were white British. Again, that's a limitation of where I placed it. A-levels, undergraduate degree, and postgraduate degree were the qualifications that were held by participants. In a relationship, 40% of them were single, 31% of them were, and 20% were married. 40% had children, 56.7% did not. Household income was varied. And the reason why I put this in is because when I do more detailed analysis, all of this will come in incredibly handy for me to analyze. But interestingly, it also gives me a kind of a perspective of where I need to gain more data from to ensure that my sample is representative of the population of the UK, which is essentially where I'm placing this study. 83.6% stated in the main findings that they had visited local green spaces and or local culture and heritage sites during lockdown. Main motivations for leaving the house concerned exercise and fresh air. 74.5% of participants stated that the geographical limitations placed on them due to lockdown had resulted in the wider discovery and exploration of their local area, which is very interesting. New footpaths, cycle routes, and also bridleways alongside new and interesting areas were identified as being discovered the most. And this is where a really important point is made. 72.7% participants acknowledged that the wider discovery of their local area had reinforced their connection to place, providing a newfound appreciation to their home area, village, town, or city. And 76.4% stated that they will continue to engage with their local area post-COVID. And I've kind of put this note in, but this is the importance of this kind of initial studies that DMOs really, and councils as well, really need to act in order to sustain this engagement. And I'll explain shortly why. So 46.4% of participants documented their local adventures on social media, Instagram being the most used platform. The reasons for using social media to document experience concerned a general enjoyment for posting and that people like to take pictures. And nature and natural heritage were also the most documented subjects. Just in terms of going forward with the study, the use of language is going to be important to me, but I am convinced there's a little bit more information to be extracted from social media and the way that it's been used within the pandemic. So 91.7% agreed that being allowed out during lockdown helped with their mental well-being. 90% agreed that COVID-19 had made them more appreciative of the outdoors. And 73.3% stated they will continue to engage with natural and cultural heritage post-COVID-19. Again, as I mentioned previously, with destination marketing or management organizations and local councils, because this is more kind of relevant to mental health in general, but engagement with cultural and natural heritage. This is where on a more regional or national scale that, you know, Visit England, for example, needs, or Visit Scotland or Visit Ireland or Visit Wales, really need to emphasize how they're promoting themselves post-COVID if 73.3% of at least this study would continue to engage with the outside. So important findings. The discussion. So this inaugural investigation provides useful insights, allowing for the understanding of the way in which our local cultural heritage has been embraced, how our engagement has reinforced our association to place, and how engaging with the outdoors has manifested as being a healthy tonic for the mind and soul throughout. But it does raise a number of questions. For instance, will this movement move on post-COVID? For instance, is this occurrence just part of, I guess, what we can consider Earth's big breath, a quick pause, before we all jump on a plane, only to forget about these important experiences? Fundamentally, will we see mundanity and madness ensue once again? But moreover, as I've quickly mentioned, will this movement be acknowledged by destination management organisations and marketing organisations and also local councils, or will the lack of reactivity now to the situation see the return to the same old? Fundamentally, emphasis on local is not only logical, but critical as the very survival of the cultural industry will be reliant on local custom for at least the next few years. DMOs and councils therefore need to invest their resources into emphasizing the diversity of their local areas, whilst investing into those items that were integral in providing relief and reinforcing attachment to place for many during the peak of the pandemic. If resilience can be formed through augmenting civic pride via investment into local sites of leisure, culture, and heritage, then the rewards of a new normal will and can be significant. But action is needed now. So recommendations, kind of personal recommendations. So this presentation is just a brief overview of findings. It's projected that with more specific and detailed analytical methods, more insight will be extracted from the data. And moreover, given that the initial phase of this study's primary research consisted of a pilot study, an assessment of the research strategy, the design, implementation, and results will be scrutinized and change made accordingly before the main research is carried out. I mean, for example, one of the limitations which I mentioned was the placing on Facebook and then letting my friends share it. Wasn't it really the best way of representing a wider population, which is incredibly important, because I want the perspective to be from a variety of different people, different demographics, different ages, different ethnicities, different levels of education. So that's really important. As I've mentioned as well, I'm really interested in the use of language on social media to be explored. I think there's more to be taken away from that. And then there's also the chance for structured and semi-structured interviews to extract finer details. So as I mentioned, this is a pilot, and it was just to essentially try and affirm the questions and ask myself, were they worth asking, which I hope they were worth asking, because the data that I've managed to extract through this pilot study has been quite fascinating, and I think it can lead to more interesting discoveries. But as a result, the pilot data has presented me with fairly robust information, and which will allow for the progression to something more substantial. And any ideas and suggestions around what could be done to better this study would be greatly appreciated. And in terms of contacting me, there is my email address. But thank you very much for listening, and any questions, please let me know.